All right, we are live.
I didn't recognize you with your mask. Morning. Okay, we will, it's 9 o'clock, so I will call to order the Park Board of Commissioners meeting. For the record, all commissioners are present and accounted for. Thank you very much. We have one public comment. And so Karen Smith, I will. It's just a question. And we'll address the question. The question is, what is the status of Lytle Park? When is construction likely to begin? And I'm willing to just, can we have an update or status?
Absolutely. So there is a funding gap. We have pretty fully developed plans. And there is a funding gap that we are working to close. It is on the order of plus or minus 1.2 million in that range.
Of gap?
Of gap. The construction costs have, since that project was initially quoted 4 years ago-ish, construction costs have gone up. For a while, they were going up 1% a month. Other times, they've gone up substantially. So that, predominantly that has led to a pretty substantial funding gap that we're working to solve, because we need the funding identified before we can go out for fresh bid on that. So you don't want to go out for fresh bid and then have numbers that you can't support. It's not in keeping with the procurement guidelines, and it's also just kind of not good for our partners in the vendors that way. So that's where is working to resolve that funding gap. Outside of that, if we had a magical pot of money today, work would be able to begin in the late spring or summer timeframe, provided any other unforeseen things that come in. But obviously, a funding gap of that size is an obstacle to move forward. But it's pretty fully designed. We have some minor complications in terms of ODOT has voice in where relocation of the remaining line of Lane Tree goes, but it's not. The problem is a financial one, not an engineering one, if that makes sense. So,
okay.
Is that responsive to the
Yes,
question? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. I'll just make a note for the public too. We are following as the Park Board, the guidelines issued by the city. And we have everyone who is within a city building must be wearing a mask. So at this point, we are all masked in response to COVID protocols established in Cincinnati. We received just one email public comment, and that was related to the proposed capital budget request. And that has been distributed to all the commissioners. Our first order of the agenda is approval of meeting minutes from November 18 and December 8. I'll take them individually. Does anyone have any corrections, comments to the November 18 minutes? I don't have them here in front of me, so I'm assuming that the corrections that I sent forward were made. Okay.
They should be.
Okay. They should be in
They're
here?
your folder to sign. Oh, yes.
Oh, they're not in the packet. They're in the folder. Okay. Okay.
It's in your folder to sign.
Are there any other changes, additions? If not, do I hear a motion to approve? Second?
Second.
Motion to accept November 18 minutes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Those are approved. December 8 minutes also distributed, and I'm assuming those were corrected with my comments. Any other changes, corrections to December 8th? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve December 8 minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. We're going to go to the quarterly police report. And I know we've got Captain Swingley online. So thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning. I hope everyone is staying healthy.
Yes.
The
COVID has been spreading through the police department like wildfire, and our crime analyst has been off sick. So I'm sorry I didn't have a complete report for you as last time, but we'll make it up for the next quarterly report. So as far as crimes or calls for service, there's not much change between the fourth quarter of 2020 and 21. So fourth quarter of 2021, there were 650 calls for service here at the city parks. Now, the top 10 parks based on calls for service, Mount Airy Forest has moved into number 1 with 74 calls for service. Waterfront Park is number 2, and Fountain Square number 3. And the list goes down. I forward you a list in your packet, and we'll go from there. 2 things of note: Mount Storm Park and Rapid Run Park have moved into the top 10. Now, these are mostly related to homeless camps. And since we've been focusing on them in the Parks Board, our cooperation and partnership, these homeless camps, my understanding, have been moved on. And most of these calls for service are for like camping in the pavilion and in the parks. So we encourage citizens to call the police anytime they see suspicious activities or unauthorized camping in the park, and let the police come and decide whether it's a violation of the park board rules or take enforcement. 2 parks that moved out of the top 10 are Mount Echo Park and Stanberry Park. And I believe these are as well the focused attention between the police department and the parks department on these homeless encampments. So there have been a few arrests for public indecency in Mount Airy Forest. And I know our vice unit has been up there conducting investigations, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but I believe they're going to come out with some additional information next week. So as far as the community program initiatives that serve underserved communities, I know the police department and the parks department are cooperating to get these programs up and running in several of the parks this coming year. Again, these are to serve the high-risk, underserved parks and neighborhoods in our city. So overall, the parks are good. I believe they're safe. Go out, come out and enjoy the parks. That's all I have for today.
Thank you, sir. Any questions, comments? I had a question. The additional info on Mount Airy Forest, will we receive communication on that, or is that just going to be a public release?
Reach out to the vice unit and our public information office to get that to the board. We'll forward it on to the parks department, and I'm sure they'll forward it on to you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So from a big picture standpoint, what is the major concern? It sounds like it's homeless encampments. What's a major concern CPD has for our parks at the moment?
Well, there you go. The homeless encampments, the people in the parks. Sometimes it's intoxicated people in the parks. And again, if anyone sees anything suspicious, please call the police department and let us investigate.
Thank you.
Question. The additional programming that you mentioned in some of the parks that is being planned, can you say a little bit about what is planned there?
These programs are to include theater, puppet shows, and children's activities.
Oh.
And you have identified the parks in which those activities will occur.
Yes, it was in an email, and I can get that forwarded to you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Any other questions for the captain?
I just have one more.
Sure, yeah.
On page 12, where you have a chart of citywide parks and the types of calls for service. I was not able to decipher what those meant. And I was wondering if you could just run through those quickly so I'll know what that is for the next report.
Types of calls for service, like 911 calls.
Yes.
That's just people getting on the phone, calling 911 for suspicious activity, not really characterized. by an offense type report. Like investigations and hazards, like a car broken down or someone could use some help, disorderly persons. Occasionally have accidents in the park, person down,
Okay,
people overdosing in the park,
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
okay. And SUSP?
Suspicious activities.
Oh, okay.
Acronyms, hate 'em.
And if you wouldn't mind just completing the list for me, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, we have person down, like animal runs, suspicious activities, non-residential burglaries,
Okay.
parking violations, some characterized as unknown, and theft reports.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you, Captain. It's a very, very complete report, and I appreciate the update.
Okay, thank you very much and enjoy your year.
Thank you.
Bye.
Our next agenda item is a Freedom Park presentation. I would ask Commissioner Castellini, please stay in the room. You can sit in the audience. It's a public presentation. I'm absolutely sure. No need to leave the room. It's public. Good morning, Phil.
Oh, you guys better have this. That's one for you.
So, John, do you want to introduce our guest?
I would be delighted to. Phil Cassidy from the Cincinnati Reds has spearheaded a notion that's coming known as Freedom Park. It's received a few audiences and different sort of constituencies and stakeholders in the community. And Phil agreed to share in the Board of Park, or fill in rather, the Board of Park Commissioners on the work to date and the concept moving forward. So,
Great, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
good morning. The deck, and if you do have a copy, I brought extras. I wasn't certain if everybody had one. FRCH Nelson has done a really nice job of presenting the vision and each component. And so for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all those details. I thought it'd be more important to discuss with this group the origin of the project, its intent, and kind of where it needs to go from here. Do I have permission to present with the mask off? Because if I keep going, I might pass out, or is that?
It's fine with me. But I don't know what the rules
If
are.
it's a rule, it's a rule. We'll go.
Phil,
I'm fine.
oh, okay.
We'll be fine. Okay, so again, this is the banks, and one of the things I think as background, it's important to know why I got involved personally in this project. I was on the Freedom Center board for 8 years, on the Parks Foundation board for almost 10. With I was on the subcommittee for the Riverfront Park, worked with Willie and the staff, in the design and implementation of the park. I've had a lot of involvement in things like the Icon Music Center, the boat dock. And so the banks, and certainly with our role down there at the Reds, is certainly near and dear to everything that we're involved in down there. And the banks, as we know, is a little over 10 years old, and it's a project that continues to struggle with tenants coming in and out of the development. The development's not quite fixed. That 80, 90 events a year isn't quite enough to keep. This is our entertainment district. Most of those venues have been built for big events, and it continues to struggle. So the goal of the project was really around activation for the banks. We fought back in 2014 to get the open container district created as part of the All-Star events. And as you can tell, until the Door District, there was never really an activation of that designation until then. And so this was really started at the time when the project was presented for the Door District. And one thing I want to point out before I get off this slide, the attempt of this project is really to serve three masters. That's the parks for one, the banks is the second, and to create a kind of a focal point, gathering point for the banks for non-game day events to be activated and have some infrastructure there. And then the last was to feed the Freedom Center, a concept that the mayor and Woody at the Freedom Center had dreamed up about, bringing the Freedom Center experience out into a park-like setting in the block in front of the Freedom Center. So I'll get into how these three things combined in the design, but I want to point out on this slide that one of the inspirations for this is you can see that grassy spot right in front of the Freedom Center. Aside from that sliver of park in front of the Moorline Lager House, that riverfront park doesn't really push all the way up into the bank. So I want to make sure that this group understands one of the big inspirations and why you're going to hear me present the desire to have the park maybe take the lead and be the champion of the project is that it'll really bring that park all the way up into the banks, to the center of the banks in a way that I think will better connect it to the rest of the beautiful park system, and certainly the riverfront park, Smale Riverfront Park. So moving ahead, and again, I'll move quickly just for the sake of time. There's plenty in the deck to do the deeper dive and understand exactly each component, but again, I'll try to move through it quickly today. This was the original presentation of the banks group to develop the Door District. As you can see, they had the eastern block and the western block to be identified to be pedestrian, but the original design showed the middle blank. So when they met with us at the Reds to pick our brains on this strategy, we said, we're in love with it. I personally think this should have been a pedestrian way as part of the design, from the origin of the project. So this is something we thought should have happened for a long time. And I was curious why the center was left blank. And the answer I got was, we were told by the city to leave that blank because the mayor's working on something with the Freedom Center. So I got permission to talk to the mayor about that project, and neither the mayor, the city hall, or the Freedom Center had started to visualize or engage anybody to really visualize the project for the center block. So I got his permission to try to design a project that could fit into this design. As you know, they only approved the eastern block, so we've only identified and started to do the work, close the street, and started to make the improvements on just the eastern block. But I think long-term, the vision is to go west, but Mayor Cranley only approved the eastern block, and that's the only thing that's been renovated to date.
And Phil, the eastern block, I think, from my visual, it seems to have been a successful endeavor.
It was. And one of the things that I recognized when you really did a deeper dive, that green was represented to be kind of turf. And, when you first look at this, you think there's going to be a major investment in pavers and types of things that aren't going to make it look like a street anymore. But what I learned doing a deeper dive, ultimately that plan as illustrated, all that blue was just supposed to be paint. And the green was to be AstroTurf. And I, as politely as I said, I think that's a pretty underachieving goal if that's our vision for what that is. Now, in the defense of the plan and the fact that it got started slow and there's not a big budget for it, it didn't need much investment, to be candid, right? They shut the street down, they let the restaurants expand their outdoor patios to the sidewalk edge, and it worked to do its job to be a gathering point. So at the end of the day, you could argue it didn't need a ton of investment, but also I felt it was a bit underwhelming. Now, the reason we got engaged is if I'm going to criticize the plan and I'm going to set a vision for something else, then we felt we should put our money where our mouth is. And so we engaged at the Reds' expense, FRCH, to do the design I'm walking through today. And I think you'll see in the iteration for the center block, we're trying to make it a park and make it look, you wouldn't even be able to tell there was ever a street there. And one of my challenges with the current eastern block in the Door District, it's functional, it's working, but at the end of the day, it looks like we took a city block, parks and planters on either end of it, and closed it. It just doesn't look like much, but it's serving the function. So it's proved the model, and that's why I believe this long-term vision to do this center block project and eventually add the western block as pedestrian as well will work. It should be pointed out that the north-south streets have to stay active to service the bridge. So it'd be nice to have it be contiguous, but the traffic flow is going to always have this project have those splits between each block. So again, walking through just the original concept, and then we set this vision, the gateway to freedom. So the definitions around the park are very much Freedom Center centric to give it the naming, the branding, the vision, and you'll see where we have the placeholders for exhibits to be used, but ultimately it's a park first and foremost. So again, I encourage you to read the deck that's there. We don't have enough time to go through it page by page today, so I'll try to move quickly. But again, it talks about the inspiration, the vision, what our goals are for the project. These are, again, inspirational concepts from other places around the country that you'll see infused into the park. And this is really a page that illustrates the project in its entirety. And it's broken into sections intentionally. If you can imagine, everything to the northern part of the gathering point in the center is kind of the sidewalk edge of the Freedom Center. So those top three sections, and again, apologize for my eyes. So sections, 5, 4, and 2, you'll see those are all very much geared to the Freedom Center, where the balance of them are more geared to the park-like setting, in the center rally point as number one. And so they're broken down into these sections for several reasons. One, to explain the different functions in each one, but similar to how this group funded the Smale Riverfront Park, you break it into its components, and those components allow for layers of sponsorship and corporate donations to help fund the project. So that's the other reason to have these sections in how to break down the park, because there's an intent to continue to help with the fundraising as time goes on. So the way that the deck works is that each of these sections is broken down one at a time to identify what it is, what the design of that particular section is supposed to look like and its intended uses. And then as the deck goes on, it gets into the renderings. So again, the first section is about the rally point. Anytime you have major activations down here, for example, our opening day block party, you had the Juneteenth event move from OTR down there this year. You had the Kroger just moved the wellness event from the convention center down here. You need that center point, and the development has never had that center point, the fountain square of the banks, so to speak. So that center block, that rally point is intended to be a place where we're making an investment so that when people want to come do pop-up events, if there's more infrastructure there, it'll be easier and less costly for people to have the events there, park mini marathon, after marathon parties, those types of things, pop-up events. And those are the activations that we need to put in between the sporting events to help keep the banks active, right? So that was the concept. This is the third iteration of this plan. The first iteration, I will tell you, I'm the entertainment district, event guy. So I will tell you, my first version of this had a big stage, and it was more about that type of activation. When we ran it by the city and representation from the parks and the Icon folks and the Bengals and county commissioners, some of the feedback we got, people were confused by seeing a staged investment there. Are we trying to compete with the Icon? That was never the intent. And so frankly, we stripped that out, not just because of the expense, but there was a little bit of that confusion. That was never the intent of the project, but the idea to establish a center point, a point where you're going to do those bigger activations, there's some infrastructure there to do it. So that's the intent of this center rally point. And so again, inspiration images as to what those types of activations look like. This is now the section right in front of the Freedom Center. One of the things that we're trying to do is bring exhibits out out of the museum. And unfortunately, the first iteration of this, anybody that did hear about the mayor's vision for that, it was kind of a statue park, is how it kept being presented. What we try to do in this plan is illustrate there are a lot of different ways that you can do exhibits to bring the Freedom Center experience outside of the Freedom Center without having it just be a statue. And I want you to pay particular attention to the die cut metal where you see them at night. So those are panels that can be a storyboard, that can be talking about a timeline. And then at night, you light those from behind. It creates a very cool visual. So in the design, you'll see the towers that come out of they're actually just vent towers that come out of the garage. If you remember, there are those big kind of concrete masts right in front of the Freedom Center. Okay. Well, the idea is we can wrap those with metal and literally turn those into exhibits. And then at night, you can illuminate them from behind. And so it shows you an example of how you can use existing infrastructure to create platforms that you can do exhibits on as part of this idea of bringing the Freedom Center up. So that's what that's representing in that section, just in front of the center. We now go down to what I believe is more of the park-like setting. So these are examples. Blue Ash Park is an example of some of the inspiration for this project. So these are just different visuals of the types of things that we'd like to see that section of the park look like. One of the things I want to point out in particular is the path, and you see the hill with the cutout through it. If you read through the deck, you'll read the specifics about that idea. I think that was one of the more interesting ideas for an activation of an exhibit for the Freedom Center. The Underground Railroad is what the Freedom Center is there to represent. That's really what the museum is all about. And so we were taking people literally, in secret underground, a lot of times to freedom. This part of the park and part of the exhibit opportunity, that mound would be put there intentionally just for a point of interest in the park, but a path that would cut through it, and the inspiration for that idea, not just from this picture that was shown, but the idea is now we're above ground in the daylight, cutting through a path to freedom. So that's very much a symbolic presentation of an idea for a different type of exhibit that can be incorporated into this project. This is the path to freedom concept. So literally, if you think about it, you come across the bridge. Many of those who would have crossed the bridge, the Ohio River, to come to Ohio to get to freedom, literally that path to freedom. So this is a sidewalk that takes you from the circle turnaround in front of the suspension bridge up through the plaza into the Freedom Center. And again, illustrations of how you can use that pathway. The Bicentennial Park, I believe, is the one where we've done a lot of that interesting different things in the sidewalk. So as you walk through the park, there's different things in the concrete that you're learning. And so similar, again, this is another place where you can do an activation of the Freedom Center and have exhibits. It's a timeline, there's storytelling happening. But at the same time, it's in a park-like setting. So if you take the time to look down and read and absorb that, you can. But if not, you could just as easily be there enjoying the park. And so that's really the multifaceted notion of this project. So these are the opportunities to, again, bring the Freedom Center experience out, but at the same time have a beautiful park-like setting. This is, I think, one of the more interesting and opportunistic things that exist. This is for those who remember the North Star Cafe, there was always a notion of having a restaurant active at the Freedom Center. It's been closed now it's got to be going on 6 or 8 years at this point. The North Star Cafe probably did the best during all of the construction. And mostly if you went there at lunchtime, you saw a lot of construction workers there. But kind of that vision of what to do with that space never really fit in mission, and they've been struggling to figure out what to do with the space. So these are inspirations of other ideas. It sits there on the corner. There's a beautiful, huge plaza sidewalk right in front of it. So the idea is to basically make it an active bar restaurant that spills out to the plaza, becomes part of of the bank's activation. But the concept, and I literally just had a meeting this week with Joe up at who runs the kitchen up at the kitchen and the culinary training program, apprentice program up at the Finley Market. So the concept is you would have a diverse owned and operated restaurant, but you would have people come in and train and learn the culinary and bar industry. There's also an opportunity to have food trucks outside of that. So again, a focus on another food and beverage offering at the banks, but with a diverse ownership in mind, and to have an incubator project as part of it, where we're having people be able to learn the trade and do that right at the Freedom Center. So I think that's a way to connect their mission of the 5 on Freedoms, financial being one of them, and just to activate the section of the Freedom Center that's been blank, and just put something else to have some action happening at the bank. So that's very centric to that corner of the project. And again, as you can see, you could get donations, separate donors to each of these, whatever they kind of gravitate to as being most interested in, just the park section, or somebody that might think that's, Ruby might want to get involved in what happens on that section. So this notion of having these different elements within the project so that you can have different sponsorable elements. This is the last part of it up at the corner closest to the Freedom Center. Again, this is where the Berlin Wall exhibit is right now. And this is, again, you bring in some audio visual. This is about the Freedom Center having a place where you could come out after you've done an exhibit, and a docent could give a follow-up, a place to reflect and review what they've just experienced in the Freedom Museum. And again, a place for them to promote the next changing exhibit or what have you. So again, this section of the project very centric to promoting what it is that's happening inside the Freedom Center, but using some AV to bring life and action to that outside of the center and hopefully draw people in. And then these are the renderings. And so I'll first point out that center rally point. As you can tell, I hope it appears as we saw it too, that you can't even tell there was ever a street that went through there. We have this glass infrastructure was very much inspired by the Blue Ash Park out there, where if those who've been out there have that section that's kind of covered in the colored glass that is between the two building infrastructures. Except because this is at the Riverfront Park, you'll see we created these to have more of that kind of avatar tree look to the glass infrastructure. And then I'll illustrate those concrete vent systems that are otherwise just a solid block of concrete serving no purpose. We're wrapping those in metal with the opportunity to have exhibits a part of that. And then as you can see these elements, you see the smaller, I don't know if the laser will work on this or not now, but you can see a smaller iteration of the covered glass little place to sit there. Same thing, that's another exhibit. That's a possible smaller sponsorship element. And so the concept being there's a blanket sponsorship for the whole park. There could be a sponsorship just for the center rally point. And as you can see, you could break it down in a pyramid fashion as part of the fundraising campaign. That's with and without the glass infrastructure. I can tell you the first iteration was much bigger. We got prices back on that and scaled it down as a result of sticker shock. So these renderings are with and without. It starts to give you some views elevation wise. We didn't want that infrastructure to take away from the visuals of the park. As you can see, we want it to feel, you know, it's obviously has to serve the purpose, but we want it to feel like it fits in the park-like setting rather than just looking like a carport out there. So again, hopefully, and I think they did a nice job in the design to do just that. Different elevation drawings, you can kind of see the rally point. We then go inside and show you, the Freedom Center folks were very concerned about the infrastructure and the obstructed potential to obstruct views. So this is from the elevation where the eternal flame is on the 3rd level. And again, showing the impact with and without the infrastructure. And I think it does not negatively impact the views of the river, as you can see. But again, depending if we can raise the funds for it or not, those are what it would look like with and without. This takes you down to the 2nd level. And again, the reason we designed it to be glass and metal the way we did, we still want you to be able to kind of see through it. So now you're at the 2nd level where the slave pen is and a lot of their events take place. And so again, I think we've been able to accomplish it where you still see some of the great views that you get out of that space. This is the view from the circle turnaround. Now this rendering illustrates the vision of moving the Berlin Wall. And I can tell you, we didn't have money to have them change it, but that is not going to happen. There is a vision here for a potential, a substantial statue there. But the reality is you can't really walk down and engage with an exhibit in that turnaround because that's a very busy vehicular turnaround. But this illustrates that notion of this is where that path to freedom begins. As you can see that meandering sidewalk that gets up into the Freedom Center. And again, the idea that you could put words, and again, you can tell the Freedom Center is engaged Brave Berlin to put the details as to what the exact exhibits that would fit into this space. Everything we've illustrated here are more in the form of placeholders. So again, that's something that they will own what the final details would be. We've simply given them a canvas on which to paint the vision from their perspective. And a couple more, and this is where you can see that cutting through the mound, again, trying to make a very, very bold statement with that one particular exhibit as part of the park. And again, when you get up close, this is this is on that left side of the front entrance and that gathering place for potentially after visits and more just examples of the types of AV that you can incorporate into that park. Overhead view, this is the restaurant concept, as you can see, spilling that North Star Cafe out onto that plaza and very much making it part of the banks. And again, with the focus on diverse vendors and employees and operators of that space. And right now, this is the range. I have a detailed budget, which, and I apologize for not having it in this deck, we'll send over. And we've had 2 different companies give us numbers on this, but this is the range. And part of the reason there's a range, again, with and without that center enclosure and that type of thing. But I would tell you, we had originally started, and Mayor Cranley was very much a champion of this. I was told that there would be an allocation of 3 million coming out of the city was our hope. I think that evolved to be 1 million by the time John left. But my hope was that we would get a third, kind of third city, third county, and then fundraise through corporations and foundations and the like, the balance. It's a big vision. It comes with a big price tag. Unfortunately, as Molly, these price tags are going up every day. It doesn't matter what type of project that you're working on. So we don't want to be naive to what the cost of the vision is. And the last piece was that I want to share is one of the reasons we, the Reds, presented the concept and invested the couple $100,000 that we did to get the project this far. We felt that if just the Freedom Center or just the parks or just the banks presented, that there might be more difficulty in getting the community to rally around it. So the vision was, if we, the Reds, present a project that serves all 3 of those clients in a way that really does benefit all 3 groups, that might be the easiest way to present a big vision like this. And lastly, it was never our intent to be to go from champion to lead owner operator of project. That's not our time or space to do that. And so the vision that we had as we had continued dialogue with Mayor Cranley was that because I think it's first and foremost a park, I think it secondarily serves the Freedom Center. And lastly, serves the banks as a rally point in a way that you can activate. And so the vision was to have the park take the lead. One of the challenges was, John, Mayor Cranley's thought was that you all have a lot to do already. There's a lot of park to maintain in struggling resources and everything else. So he didn't want to be presumptuous that there's tons of resources at the parks to be able to take this on or throw a huge investment at it. But to be the lead, and at least the concept that was discussed was to potentially hire a group to then facilitate the actual construction and whatnot. We certainly continue to be willing to be part of the fundraising committee on the project. We have not presented it to any corporations yet. I've had dialogue with Kroger so far, just because a lot of the inspiration for this came from when we helped, the Reds helped Kroger and their consultants figure out how to move that wellness event from the convention center to the banks. So a lot of that was happening during this time. And so a lot of that was inspired by that. So I think we're going to get support there. But to date, again, it's been county commissioners. I presented the same project to the finance committee at city council a couple of weeks ago. And at this point, and I've got a meeting with Mayor next week to try to get him on board. He is aware of the project, and then I'll do a similar presentation. So it's really time to kind of do the handover and have someone or a group of folks or entities take over the project and try to see it to the finish line. So I think that's the quickest I can break that one down.
Phil,
I'm happy to take questions.
what conversations have you had to date with the county? When you say a third, where are they?
Yeah, well, like I said, that was my vision.
Right.
We continue to have a roughly, well, look, I don't think I'm telling any secrets to suggest there's been some tension with city and county over the years, right? And hopefully that day maybe changes with a change at City Hall. There was not a lot of collaboration on the most recent added project, which was the, I don't want to butcher the name, but the Music Walk of Fame that's being proposed, that the county proposed. The city said, we're not putting anything in. So the county's doing it on their own. So I will tell you, the first reaction from the county on this was, well, you weren't there for us on the Walk of Fame, and why should we be here for this? So there, we're still kind of living in this dysfunction. So we've had very productive conversations with the county commissioners. And so, but again, there's been no commitment financially or otherwise besides support, understanding. But we literally this is at the stage now where, again, we have to find the lead who's going to own the project. We have to do the deep dive into the financials and what the city, because I don't believe we can go to the corporations until we know what the city and county are going to do. Right. So I think it's, we're really at stage one of the fundraising component of this project.
So clearly the fundraising and the funding for this will be a challenge, and getting everybody aligned on the vision for the challenge. So beyond that, have you run into any, not roadblocks, but potential challenges that might jeopardize the concept?
Well, the good news is that the notion that we took the lead in kind of this third party neutral, hey, trying to just, do a broad vision helped. And that first round, the feedback I got was it seems too banks entertainment district centric. And the numbers that we got for the first iteration of the design was too expensive. And so we've gotten some of that feedback, which improved the buy-in of the commissioners and the Freedom Center and Icon and the like, right? So I think this final plan that you see, for starters, I think it's a better plan. I think it comes off more like a park than anything else. I would say, again, the first iteration kind of looked more like entertainment district activate, like I said, it was a big covered main stage, much bigger scale. So I think we've already got that feedback and then have run this final iteration through the whole group. So we've got tons of support and feedback. Everybody's all in, but now it's time to start the fundraising conversation. And then who's going to own the final bidding and operating and building, and then obviously who's going to take on and maintain. And we're certainly encouraging the Freedom Center to play a lot of role in the activation. You've got the banks committee that's already been developed to help program as well. But we really need that kind of owner operator and the total funding package is next stage.
So Phil, if Parks doesn't do that, who would be the next?
Well, there's only two left. Right, it would either have to be the
City, the
banks,
county, or the
collective
banks.
banks, or city, county, or combination.
Phil, I think there was discussion at one point about pulling together a group that would be an advocate for this project.
Yeah,
First, I'll say, this is a beautiful concept. I mean, it's ambitious, it's, it's big, forward-thinking city stuff. And I think it's really attractive and appealing. So I applaud the efforts to date. And I know you worked really hard to bring together the stakeholders, the entire community, and it seems that this is a good reflection of that. So
Thank you.
accolades on that. I know there have been discussion at one point. I mean, clearly raising $15 million is probably the biggest, like, well, how are we gonna do that? You know,
Right.
how's that all, how are we gonna pull that off? Because I hear you when you say be real, the parks would take some leadership on that, but as you already pointed out, there are already some capacity constraints.
Right.
Both in terms of people availability to work on all the stuff that needs to be worked on, and certainly from a financial resources perspective. So for us to take this on, we would be doing what you've already presented, which is gotta figure out how to pay for it.
right,
And I don't know that there's a lot of capacity for the staff here to be knocking on the doors. I don't know if we're gonna pay for that, because we're trying to get a bunch of other stuff paid for too.
right.
So is there a group out there that's willing to come together and do what you're talking about doing, which is I'm going to go talk to
Right.
Mayor
So-
Purable, I wanna raise.
Yeah, so specifically, Mayor Cranley's idea was to have it be a parks-led project. The parks would illustrate what you just did and say, so we need to assign a group to do that, and his suggestion was 3CDC. And 3CDC would kind of take over the balance of the execution, I assume including the fundraising. And again, when it comes to city, county politics, that can be a lightning rod or not, right? One of the things that one man's opinion, I have been disappointed with how, and I've said this to Steve Leeper, that there hasn't been global support for the banks relevant to where other folks have invested in improving downtown Cincinnati. That's about as politically correct as I can say. And so one of the reasons I like the concept is I've always thought it's a challenge to have kind of this competing infrastructure of 3CDC and all the different activations they're doing from Fountain Square up to Wash Park, and the banks is down here, frankly, really in the last 2 years, finally paying attention and doing that. In my estimation, the developer should have always been the one to play that role. And that's the role 3CDC's played in everything that they've done. They build it, they own it, they operate it, they activate it. At the banks, it got built and there wasn't an activator. That's been the missing link. So for me, I think having 3CDC come down and start to play a role in helping activate the banks in the way that it needs to be activated collaboratively with what they're already doing everywhere else. You could look at that as a master calendar. We shouldn't have a huge tool event happening at the banks at the same time we're trying to do a huge tool event up at Wash Park. I don't care if you have two different groups managing that or not. So I do think that one notion of kind of that, one group that's kind of in charge of that for the greater downtown, I see a lot of logic in that. But again, historically, there's not been a lot of support out of 3CDC or Steve Leeper for the banks. But I can tell you, having gone through this project for the last year, we were getting that buy-in from Steve and that group. But again, they have to be asked to do that. And that has to be something that this group would feel good about.
Yeah.
But then ultimately, I think a huge part of, the activation would come from the banks committee, Freedom Center, and potentially if engaged 3CDC, but I do think folding it into the parks in terms of the way that the green infrastructure would be maintained would be an important element.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great plan, great idea, great concept. And I do like the concept that it remains housed, so to speak, long-term within parks, so that since we've got the investment throughout that area down there, it would make a whole lot of sense to stay in parks or to land in parks. I share the same concerns just from an organizational standpoint, meaning the size and scope and the fundraising and all the requirements and management of development and all of that, the constraints that we have as a park district or a park department with everything else that we have on our table. I personally like the concept of parks owning it, but then looking for how can we partner with an organization to develop this. I think we've had, and I don't want to get ahead of the game here. I do, since 3CDC has been mentioned, I do think we have a great example of that working with Washington and Ziegler Parks. So we have precedent, we have some experience and relationship there that I think that is the type of approach and relationship that we need
I would
to
add
take
there,
as we look
remember
at
too,
this.
just as a reminder, there has been that tax overlay district that is creating a pool of funds
Yeah.
to maintain and activate the banks.
Yeah.
So there is a stream of revenue there that's intended to be participating in this type of activity too.
Yeah, and that's where after the fact, once it's built,
Correct.
I have no doubt that we will be able to use sources of funds such as that to activate it. It's not the activation as much as the upfront
Right.
planning, fundraising and development of the park itself. So that's just my initial thoughts on that. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say, I really am excited about what you've presented. I think it could totally change the face of the banks and the experience that people have down there. I really like the idea of drawing the Freedom Center outside and making it more of a part of a park than it is right now. I don't understand yet how in the world this big vision can be realized, because it will be a challenge, but I think it could totally change how our city is viewed, how people engage with our city and engage in the banks. So I applaud you for taking this on. It is extremely visionary, and I think it gets us from, I always think of Cincinnati, not always, often think of Cincinnati as we almost did it. We almost did it with the banks, and I think this is a chance for us to really complete
Thank
that
you. That was
experience
the
down
intent.
there.
I appreciate your time this morning.
You know, path forward here, I don't want to just stop. I think we need to catch up. You know, obviously, this gives us a lot of information. If we could, I would suggest that we take the next month, give commissioners opportunity to consume this, perhaps have conversations, develop your thoughts. Obviously, what I'm hearing from Phil is that we are being challenged or asked to consider that we take ownership of this. And I would like to, and I would suggest we put it on the February agenda. John, any input from you?
I was gonna suggest that I don't know, because of the nature of all the sort of stakeholders involved, if it's achievable for the February meeting, but certainly by the March meeting, I'd be open to, and really not with a lot of further dedication of staff resources than myself, work to assemble some of those stakeholders that were mentioned, and that would include potentially 3CDC and the Freedom Center, and take some temperatures in terms of capacity and appetite within that, and report that back to the board. I think that there's a well-developed concept, but I'd be amenable, should the board please, to come back with a report outlining the receptiveness or non-receptiveness of some of those stakeholders, because I think you all correctly identified, we're not just rattling around with loads of extra capacity, but let's see where that capacity may or may not exist in the community and report back, and that can inform your thinking. I want to be realistic that I'm not sure, just based on those folks, that February is achievable. If it is, hey, great, I'd love to surprise you, but I can see that stretching to March, just based on the folks and their feedback. But I think it's an exploratory conversation, and if everybody says, no, we can't, that's something that you want to know.
Well, respectfully, you know, and I'll represent the dreamer in the room. I think my meeting with the incoming mayor is of incredible importance next week, and my hope is to get him as excited about this project as a lot of folks are, and really have him look at this as a way, as the incoming mayor, to embrace a big city game-changing vision and really help drive the rest of this process, just to get the infrastructure of who's gonna do what in place. Because I think it's of critical importance to get the city and county commitments anchored down first, and understanding of who's gonna operate what. Because then with that completed package, I think then and only then can we go out to the business community and try the rest of the fundraiser. A, determine whether or not it's doable. B, are we talking about a project that's a year off or 3 years off? But I think that's an incredibly important meeting, and who should I follow up with to tell you how that went?
I think with John.
Okay,
Please.
so, and I'm hoping that he wants to get engaged in a meaningful way. If it's lukewarm, I think that is gonna add to our challenges, so I think that's a really pivotal meeting.
Yeah. And from our standpoint, as you walk into that meeting, I think what you're hearing here is the park board thinks this is a great project. We are supportive of the concept. Our major concern is the critical issues that we have in front of us right now with deferred maintenance.
Right,
and
there's no question.
you know, that. But we also understand that given the stakeholders, we think it's most effective being part of the parks and being under parks.
Right.
But we would need to evaluate and get over the hump on the fundraising.
Yeah.
And then who to use to actually
Well,
develop it with.
I appreciate hearing that.
with
That was the most important part today, because that's the same vision that we share. So, like I said, I'll follow up with that meeting next week and let you know, and hopefully it'll be momentum building, not stall.
Perfect. And from your standpoint, getting a report back from staff in March, I mean, that's, I
Yeah.
think, progressive enough
Yeah.
to let you know that we're not trying to
Yeah, I
stall
hope I
this.
have enough positive to report to even be worthy of
Gotcha.
coming back. So
Great.
let's hope for that.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks a lot. Have a good day. Appreciate it.
So Director, we will now move to fiscal year 2023 capital budget.
Yeah, I would like to call on Principal Architect Cindy France, who, along with really each member of the staff, did an enormous amount of work. But I think Cindy had the unenviable task of being the quarterback for assembling the lengthy report that you've had to review. And I had had myself on the agenda, but I think that would be a miscarriage of justice to try to carry her work over the into the end zone. So if I may defer to her, I'd like to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna run through the process because I know there's so many faces here. So this is the second year of a 2-year budget cycle. What happens is budget office will give us a target, and we have to go back to them with what we're recommending and any additional projects that we're looking to include in the budget that there may not be any funding for. So the project right now that we know that we'll have some money for is the capital infrastructure project. We always have capital infrastructure money every year. Generally, it's about $2 million is what we end up getting. This year, the budget office is telling us our target is $2.3 million. It's been increased by $250,000 because of pickleball. So that's why it's a little bit higher than it normally is. So what we put together is a list of other projects that we're calling exceptions to the budget, as well as asking for additional funding in that capital infrastructure budget. So we're looking for recommendation from the board so that we can go ahead and submit all of this back to the city. In March, we'll get to present to the Budget and Finance Committee and argue why we need more money than what they are already telling us that they are going to give to us. It then goes through the process of the mayor's review, city manager's review, and then we'll finally get to find out what allocations we're going to get. And budget starts in July of next year for fiscal year 23. So I've tried to, just from the comments that we received back in November, put a lot more information in here about how we come up with the individual projects specifically for that capital infrastructure fund, which is the one that we know that we are definitely going to get funding for. On top of that, there's another list of all the exceptions, all the other projects that we're looking to get funded. About half of them, or maybe 3/4 of them, are all off of that for fair assessment. There are projects that, big dollar projects that we need money for. Then there's some other projects listed or other goals that we have as far as trails, green spaces, forestry, things like that. So as far as the capital infrastructure budget, there's a lot of different things that we kind of look at when we're trying to prioritize like which of our projects we should really focus on. Some of it is from that poor and fair assessment list that we have received from the Grants that are Carroll study. But we also look at other things. We look at how the projects are kind of broken out throughout the city geographically, so that we're not just focusing on, say, the east side or just the west side, things like that. Accessibility is something that we try to focus on as well. Any issues we have as far as safety, that's always going to be a priority for us. And anything that we think is going to fail in the near future is another project that is obviously going to get ranked pretty highly on our list. Back in 2019, the board approved a list of capital improvement priorities, and that's the attachment A that's in here. Because I know there's some new faces in here, but the board had kind of already gone through and given us direction on what we should be focusing on. So the second page of the board report and the third and the fourth kind of breaks out all of those individual projects and where they fall into those categories. There's also a breakdown of those capital infrastructure dollars. I think it's on page 4. So it just demonstrates what percentage right now is going to take care of poor and fair projects for the assessment and the other items.
Cindy, what is that number? Because I was looking for that percentage and I just kept reading over it.
For the percentage of capital dollars that we are proposing to go towards the foreign fair.
Yes.
Right now it's 30%.
Okay.
It's almost $1.3 million of the 4.2 million
Thank you.
that we're recommending.
Thank you.
So we've had the assessment for the completed assessment, we received it in May. So we're still in the process of going through it and determining what we should really be focusing on. But the really big point is that the poor and fair list is about $50 million worth of work, just the poor and fair list. It is not all inclusive. There are a lot of big projects that are not on that list.
Such as, I mean, what would not be on that list?
Well, the retaining wall at Friendship Park right now, that's a big one. That's about $5 million. That retaining wall right outside the window there that's leaning. It's something we're taking care of right now.
Why would that not have been on the infrastructure study?
I think there were, the infrastructure study is a snapshot in time, and there are some things that were probably, and this is not to impugn the quality of infrastructure, there's some misses. I think that was probably leaning at that time, and that could have been a miss in the study. That's also dynamic. Remind me, the park, next to Hollister.
Hollister.
Inwood, thank you, excuse me, Inwood, there were some retaining walls, and those might be DOT, they might be ours, we're exploring that right now, but there were some degradations in those walls that probably a month ago, we discovered those were not in the report. They may not have been observable at the time of the report, or they may have changed since the time of the report, and so I'd say the listing, any listing that is developed prior to this is going to be continually shifting based on Unitarian National Friendship Park. There is the inclinometers that were installed 20 years ago-ish. They've shown an acceleration of slippage and activity. Waterworks is a project going on there presently on very much a fast track. So that kind of thing, they shift because the status of the projects isn't static. So I think the report informs a lot of the work and needs to continue to inform it, but it doesn't define it in its entirety because of the shifting nature of the conditions that evolve. I don't know if that was responsive to the question, but.
Yeah, it's a great tool, but it's not all inclusive.
And I know we're getting off track just a little bit, but how are we putting that infrastructure plan into work? What are we doing now with that? And I know we now identify when there is capital, was it on that infrastructure plan? But what is the proactive use? How are we putting that to use as systematically approaching that $50
I
million?
think you identified the biggest piece of it is it informs part of what's in the capital and frankly, probably part of the operating budget. Some of what's called out could be at least partially addressed through operating budgets. But I think there is a desire, I don't think there is a completion, but there is a desire for a consolidated listing of projects. Those would be new projects, those would be ongoing projects. That does not exist in a fully developed format at this time. I think it is a goal of the team for an ongoing monitoring opportunity, but does not exist at this time. But I think the direct answer to the question at this point in time is that elements of that inform the submission of the capital. Am I correct, Cindy, to say the operating budget as well, conceivably?
Well, part of the assessment did require us, or did recommend that we put about $500,000, actually it's $550,000 of our annual infrastructure funds towards individual problems such as the water features, utility maintenance, emergency damage and vandalism. So that is, it is sort of operating. So on top of the 30%, there's another 550, another 13% of the budget that is all money that we are pulling from that core fare assessment. The main problem is, the big problem is we don't have enough money. If the list of core and fare is just 50 million, let's just say it's $50 million. If we are just conservatively estimating 3% a year in construction escalation costs, that's $1.5 million a year. We're only getting $2 million of capital infrastructure averaging a year. Of that $2 million, almost 900 of it has to go to pay staff salaries. We can't solve the problem with what we are receiving right now. So what we are proposing is that we go ahead and sort of the business as usual. It's the second year of cycle. We really haven't had that much time to dig into the capital infrastructure study. Go ahead and submit asking for the $4 million. And for the next 2-year cycle, together a steering committee, I'm not really sure, but we need to somehow allocate for a separate funding stream just to address the core and fare items that we have. The money I normally get, the $2 million for capital infrastructure, I can use that to take care of the safety issues, the little things, but I can't use it to solve these major problems. There's just not, I can't do it. So it's a staffing problem, but it's a money problem. I can't get through this list with what we have.
So Cindy, let me ask you, go ahead, Linda.
Oh, thank you. It reminded me of a conversation we've had several times before as we look at the fair and poor list. And the fundamental question is, or I think the fundamental need is for us to take some time and look at that so we can decide if we want to take action on those things. And they go on a list that is defined by whatever the cost is. But there may be some of those that we make a different decision about. And it is probably worthwhile to take the time to look at those and say, is this one we want to take offline completely? Or do we want to spend however many millions of dollars it would take to bring it up to the point where it is functional and safe? So I think that's some work that needs to be done before we get too far along in allocating money to these projects that we haven't really looked at and decided what our path forward is going to be on.
There are certainly some projects on the core and fair list that probably don't really need to be on the core or fair list per your comments just now. But I would say that there are other projects, big ones, that did not make that
Yeah.
list that need to be added back
Sure.
in. And
Yeah.
every year that we're deferring these repairs, you're adding on all that escalation cost.
Yeah,
So
but
it's a big number, whether it's 45 million or 65
Oh, yeah.
million, it's unachievable.
I get it.
but to Linda's point, we do have on this list, looking at Inwood Park restore the pavilion. And somewhere also, I saw the Wilson Triangle building for allocating money for that as well. And that's the sort of thing that I think Linda's talking about.
Yeah.
Do we step back on these major things and say, what do we want to do with those assets?
Well, the Wilson Triangle building is pretty minor, and what we're looking is, I think it's like $50,000. And putting those dollars into that little building will stabilize it for the next 50 years.
I agree, but there's probably $250,000 projects out there that need to be done. And that's the only point that I'm making, is that at what point does that become the priority versus another $50,000 item that's sitting out there with the same type of needs?
And if I can take a shot, go ahead.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I think something we need to remember is, why did we spend the money to have this study done? And the reason we historically spent the money to have this study done and made that decision to spend quite a lot of money to get it done was to prove to the mayor and to city council that we did have this many $1 million in deferred maintenance, because we are constantly getting the argument, oh, you've got plenty of money. You've got plenty of money. You've got the foundation that's raising money for you. You've got plenty of money. Therefore, we can afford to cut you back. And that was the reason. So my question to you, Cindy, is, when you go to present this budget, how are you doing it? Is it going to be this format? How are you giving it to the
So
Budget and Finance
that
Committee?
format that's right in the report there, that's actually a submission document sort of prescribed by the central budgeting office, Craig?
Yeah, so there's two documents in there, so that we provide to the Budget and Finance Committee, and that document you just referenced is one of them. And usually we submit about 4 of them, and there are 4 reports from that budgeting system.
But that's a fairly mechanical answer, and I think that's part of it, and that's prescribed through the city budget process. I think there's not a political answer, but there's a persuasive answer to demonstrate the support for that need that way. And I think through the budgeting process, both capital and operating budget, I think if I can hazard to put words in your mouth, you're saying, how are you demonstrating that need? How are you backing that up? The number is what the number is, but how are you supporting that need?
And we, way back when the report first came out, we discussed amongst us, how is this report getting put forward to city council and to the mayor? And I never got an answer.
Nothing's been done. And to your point, I'm sorry to break in, but I always do. We said at that time that the issue is how we communicate this information to those who can make decisions to help us correct it. And that's where we said, we can't take this report and send it to city council with a note saying, here's what we need. And we had asked at that time, a year ago, for almost like an executive summary of here's the issue, here's the backup. We'll attach that to the backup if you want to have some late night reading, but we're at the point where we have to sit, and it's a new administration, it's a new city council. We have to be able to take advantage of any opportunity we have to lay out the problem in a very, very succinct way.
2 pages would kind of be my target. There's hundreds of pages of document and hours of research and hundreds of thousands of dollars of research work in there. I think as we have opportunity to present to council committees and or to council members individually, if they're open to investing the time to do this, I think it is a very worthwhile exercise to summarize that, recognizing that it has a dynamic nature to it. Not everything is there, and some things have been completed, others will be developed list. But I think that's a tool that can and should be developed. I don't think it's an additional 50-page report. I think it's a single-digit number of pages that says structure, it really is somewhat in the outline. Okay, $2 million leaves us with $1.2 million. We've got a park system with a monetary value of 500 million, 600 million, and we're looking at spending 0.02%. And there's going to be some national metrics that say you should spend 2% or 3% or whatever the number is. There's going to be some credible third-party metrics that say this is a target spending for ongoing operation of a sustainable system of parks. And at that point, it's a math problem. And I think laying that out in a couple of pages with appropriate, enormous supporting documentation is not I think it's an important, but not an unachievable task at all. Put that into a couple of pages. What is a variable that's not within our control is how receptive folks are to taking a meeting to listen to it. But I think as commissioners, that's a good spot. If we can prepare you with the tools that you're asking for, so that then as leaders of the parks and members of the commission, you have opportunity to engage with the electeds in a way that the staff isn't necessarily invited or permitted to do. I think that could be a good exercise. So that is a lot of words to say. I think a 2 to 3 page report synopsizing that and laying out kind of the costing model that's in the fundamental of, I think is a good deliverable, and I think that's achievable in advance of the next board meeting.
Okay. I'm for some verbiage, but nothing speaks stronger than a picture. Okay, and I think that if we can develop a map that, like this kind of a map, that gives a visual picture of where in our park system this whole deferred maintenance exists and how it exists in a color code. And I know Rocky can do this.
And
I can do it.
Yeah, right.
Actually.
Well,
Yeah.
and the two
I
parts.
just think I think it'll scream.
Yeah. And the two parts, besides the funding need for dollars, it's a very big issue that we have continued, we meaning the city of Cincinnati has continued to push operating costs, which are salaries, into the capital budget. So we have to continue to pound away that that's not the right thing to do, because when you take $800,000 out of a $2 million, you don't have anything left for the actual capital work. I think the meeting is set for February the 20th, not March. February the 20th, I think, is on the calendar for Parks to present to the Budget and Finance Committee. I think there's an opportunity to reschedule that if we speak now. And that's where I would just encourage you to look into that. John will be part of that presentation to City Council. So I think this is going to be the first critical opportunity to be in front of the whole council.
So I guess I would just say that I agree with you, John, that in fact, I wouldn't even talk about projects. You know, I wouldn't, you submit what you have to submit, but your 2 or 3 page report, I think, really needs to encapsulate what Cindy's talking about and put it in context for them. Just very simply, they're easily confused, I guess, or whatever, but you got this much work to do. Your national targets as it relates to what should you be putting in. Additionally, I think you need to look at, we got to dig ourselves out of a hole. We're in a deep hole here. You know, to your point, we can allocate every dollar that gets, you know, shoved our way, and it won't even cover the increase in inflation to get this stuff done. So we're losing ground every day.
Exactly.
And my sense is that's the message that needs to be conveyed to these people, because, you know, we can't do it. We don't have enough money. You know, the foundation doesn't have enough money. So it's their choice. They can, you know, let parks go to hell or, you know, do something about it. But, you know, we really can't do anything about it. And I think that is the critical message to get across to them, that we continue to get deeper and deeper in a hole. And if they choose not to do something about it, as well as I think put it in context, as you said, looking at the mass of work that needs to be done and the ridiculous amount of money that is, thrown our way, of which close to half has got to cover salaries. It's stupid, so let's, convey that to them and let them sit on that and chew it over. And then if they decide we'll continue to do that, they own it.
With your grace, I'll use the word stupid less frequently in our report, but I do get the outline.
I'm not quite as politically correct as Phil. You've done a good job raising that.
I do get a sense.
His father's done the good job because his mother's not politically correct.
I think I do get a sense of a deliverable. I know our GIS team that we've all spoken high level. I don't know how big of an asset is of them, so I don't want to commit a timing on that, but I do think it is deliverable. Say, here is our investment or disinvestment on a capital operating basis in different parts. I think that's probably reflectable. Crystal's nodding, so I'm taking that as a good sign that's reflectable. I don't know what kind of a lead time requirement that is, but as far as crafting a numbers heavy report, I'm fond of the phrase, I think sometimes we've drowned in detail when a synopsis is what can carry the day. So
I have a couple comments, if you don't mind, John.
No.
I may be just repeating what everybody's already said, just in my own language. It's not meaningful for me to do. So what we've been talking about is this infrastructure report and prioritizing that infrastructure report. I just want to be clear on kind of where we're headed, and also get maybe establish some expectations on when you will actually see something like this. I understand there's not enough time in the day to do everything that needs to be done. This is something that's added to the list. So we've got this infrastructure report. Cindy, you've got to add some projects to it so that we have a comprehensive view of the issues that are out there. And I like this very simple, these categories that are here about correcting or eliminating safety hazards, preventing deterioration, and then providing accessible facilities. And in that providing accessible facilities, I think there's subcategories of, accessible, I think is like, I can get a wheelchair there, right? Is that what you mean by that? Or do you just mean these are ways people can access the parks?
Not necessarily a wheelchair, but yeah, improved pathways, I guess is a lot of it.
Because I'd like to also add a category that means these are ways people can access the parks, meaning playgrounds, hiking trails, fishing, dog park. I mean, at some point we need to get to the amenities that are associated with the parks in a way that we can start to drive a strategy around. We want to have 12 dog parks in our system. We only have 3. I'm not here to promote for dog park, just to be really clear on that. But I'm trying to get to this idea that we've got an understanding of what our issues are, and also the opportunity for us to build an agreement around where we're going to spend time, because here's what's happening. We've got this list of stuff. We're not sure if we agree with you that there are priorities, but this is the only thing we've been given, so this is the only thing we have to respond to. In the meantime, Phil Castellini showing up and the gentleman at the pickleball is showing up, and they're advocating hardcore for big stuff and raising money in City Hall for it. We don't have resources to do that same level of advocacy for the Inwood Park Pavilion, because we don't have pictures, all the stuff. So I start with, I get we need a 3-page report that needs to be done now, but on a much more broad perspective, ASAP. Gotta have some infrastructure report, prioritize, understood, and then develop that plan for what do we want these parks to become, and how that arm us with that information so that we can advocate for the parks. That's what we're here to do, is advocate for the parks. One more thing, the 33 million that is here, and then I'm going to totally turn it over, is what we're asking for or is that even in the realm of feasibility, or are we just trying to make a point here? Or can we actually get this? And hang on once, let me just finish and then I swear I'm gonna shut up. If so, then I agree that I know, Brad, you said we don't need to talk about projects, but I agree with you, Susie, is that pictures are everything on this. And we do need to do that, picture of, this is what we're dealing with because these city council people made a decision. Finally, I will add, when we are doing pictures and after pictures, and maybe this is the point where Rafi actually can help you and his team, the after pictures have to be a whole lot better than these after pictures are. When we're presenting, I mean, we've got this after picture of Mount Epic, there's still a shovel here, there's no grass. This doesn't, I'm looking at the two pictures and I'm almost thinking the before picture looks nicer because I can see grass, it's blue skies outside. We just have to make sure that if we are doing pictures, that they actually compel the mood that we're trying to compel. I don't know. With that,
help from
Just one other point I'd like to make to John. And when you make your presentation, you have a great opportunity this year because of COVID for pointing out that it was parks that created health and happiness in our city equitably for everybody. And boy, I think that needs to come out loud and clear in your first sentence, frankly, and then give them why they need to give us $33 million. And the federal money is out there, guys. It's out there. We just have to learn how to go get it.
Keying on that federal money question, I think in the absence of the most likely candidate being federal money, historically, the guidance from the city budget office has been close off. There might be a few percentage points up or down, but historically, our expectation is that we will receive that 4.2, that first line. That's historically what we're counting. And that's where a lot of our focus is spent, because absent some presumably external force, because I don't think the city is sitting on that kind of cash and those resources. So if there is some, let's hope for federal money that's available. This work is done in preparation, because typically how that money comes in is not just a general bucket to go fix parks, but it comes in for water lines, retaining walls, roads, a specific piece. So we have a menu of developed options that can be advanced on that, but it is not, while it is certainly our desire, I don't think absent a change in the currently known factors, we're not expecting $33 million. That's I could give them the dream, but we're not anticipating that without some.
well then, would you make a recommendation on the 2 or 3 items that are on that $33 million report that we could strongly advocate for, that we actually would have a shot at? Is that, what's the strategy here, I guess?
Could we circle back? I think, yes, we could. I don't know which ones specific at this moment to say, but I think based on urgency of the circumstance, or maybe greater impact or opportunity to leverage some kind of partner or other component funding that way, I think absolutely that could. That ties back to another, you said earlier, we are hoping to have a schedule next week, interviews for the division manager of planning design, and that will, one of the competencies that I'm looking for in that is the assembly and maintenance of an ongoing, call it a list, but that's too simple, sort of an index of projects, be they new projects, be they ongoing projects, be they inwood park retaining wall, whatever it is, that would be everything informed by the Branson and Carroll report. All of that, I think, a central repository, that's a big lift. I don't want to lead you to think that that's a 30-day deliverable, but I think that's if I were in your chair, that's a thing that I would be interested in having. It is an enormous project, and we don't want to have to create a staff position to just assemble a list. So it is, I recognize the scale of that undertaking, but I think it's important and it's useful in a range of questions that the board has. It's also frankly useful as we're presenting to electeds on, these are our needs as documented here. Here's where they were a year ago on that same format, same kind of thing, because even with just inflation, if not a pebble moved in a park, we're at least $1.5 million further challenged a year from now, and probably more than that. Is in the last few years we'd be 2.5 million on those percentages. So I think that's a good tool. I think that's a big tool, a very big tool to develop. But that's one of my desires for the division manager plan design is the development and ongoing maintenance most important. As all of us said, a report that's static doesn't recognize that we live in a dynamic system. So the tracking tool needs to be dynamic and accommodate that. It can't just be, here it is today.
Right, and that's part of the danger of putting together, like, okay, here's the $50 million worth of projects, and here's their order from, 1 to whatever it's 300. Because just in the past year or two, we know that we've had some major projects pop up that aren't on that list.
Right.
Like that retaining wall right there. Like the hill slippage we're seeing at Friendship Park right now. So, I mean, we can rank it, but then does that mean that we should take care of the items that are ranked
No,
1, 2, and 3 first?
no, it
Because,
doesn't.
right,
But it
because,
gives us something to work from. And, again, I think in terms, like in matrix, is having these, columns for safety and, until we get to amenities. And just really, it helps us all be on the same page in what the needs are. I will tell you, this memo that you wrote, I'm putting in my permanent file because I pull things that I reference later if they're, valuable content. And this write-up that you did is very good. And
Thank
I
you.
Yeah,
felt
Really
yeah.
well done.
very
Yes.
educated by the end of it, and I want that.
Linda?
You had
Yes.
mentioned a picture. Both of you guys had mentioned a picture. And I think the picture that we need to create through numbers, through words, and through images is what's going to happen if we continue to get 1.2 million
Yeah.
to keep 5,000 acres and a couple hundred structures.
Yeah.
How many miles of roads? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So let's put that front and center in front of all these people, say, you guys signing up for ridiculous, or you want to, solve something?
Yes,
Linda?
I just want to echo all of the comments about the report. It's very informative. And also the real need for awareness, because I believe, I'm concerned that the average person doesn't believe. We've got all these reports about $50 million worth of deferred maintenance or whatever. I don't think people get it. And I don't think people are responsive. The people who have to make the decision, I don't think they understand it. So whatever we can do to make that real for them is going to be critical. It's like, I listened to the reports about, our city is really, really dirty. Well, people are all around and they see what's going on. But all the time now we're saying, this is the problem. This is the problem. So it's heightening the awareness of it. And I think we could use some of that. Because I think the average person will go to our parks. Our parks look pretty darn good in general. But it's the behind the scenes, if you will,
Yeah.
fundamental stuff that needs to take care of. So as long as we've got pretty flowers and nice experiences, people don't get it, that we've got some things that need to happen.
we certainly have lots of ugly photos. We have probably 1,000 or more from the assessment. But yeah, Bellevue Park, that's a great park to go visit right now. Inwood Park is a great park to see some of the real challenges that we have. I've spent, I don't know, $1 or $2 million on infrastructure at Inwood. It's a 20-acre park over the past 5 years. Walk through that park, if you gave me $10 million, I probably couldn't fix everything that's wrong just at Inwood Park. And even if you took the pavilion away, I probably would still spend another $5 million there.
And somebody said it, the consequences of inaction.
Yeah.
What is going to happen if we don't do what we need to do?
Okay, this is off topic as far as you're concerned, Cindy, but I cannot resist making this point. The average citizen of Cincinnati does not understand the separation of city parks and county parks. There isn't a person who voted for that county park levy that understands that we don't get a penny of that. And until we can figure out, Rocky, and this is you, a way of getting that point across to the public, I mean, we're in a deep hole, and we're gonna be in a deeper hole because the average citizen thinks that we've got a county levy that takes care of this.
That,
Well,
and I,
I'm just gonna say, the other thing is, I would bet they don't know that all we get from the city is basically the $2 million
yeah.
every year.
In capital.
In capital, right.
And,
I
and,
get
and
that.
John, the other point with the levy is that the point to the city council is that Hamilton County Parks recognized they had a significant issue, and they went to the public and got money because they were facing the same thing. So I think, you know, I don't know that they know exactly where it's all going to spend, but it's that point that they did something about it. And we need to do the same thing or our parks will fall into this area.
My own wife went for a walk with a friend in Winter Woods and complimented me on how nice it looked. Thank you, I'll pass it on.
Yeah, right.
So the average citizen very much is in that, in that space. I think I've got some direction on a couple of more immediate, a little bit midterm that way, but have some good feedback that the staff and I can work on responsive to. I would not be an advocate of trying to push back. I don't know, I lean to Craig on what the timing is on the budget presentation that way, but I don't know what we give up. If we give up that slot, maybe nothing, it might be fine, but if we, I think that's still almost a month away. I
Yeah,
think
if
some
you
of
look
this
into that, yeah.
is doable.
Yeah, the only final thing I'll say is on the Friendship Park retaining wall with the $6 million. If that is such a critical item, you see where Waterworks said, this is an emergency, we've got to get this done, and the city manager approved it. We might want to consider pulling that out as an emergency item versus being lumped into the normal capital budgetary process for parks.
Which may tie a bit to what Commissioner North was saying, is kind of in schoolwork, they call it chunking. You know, I can't write a book report, that's too much. Well, first you've got to select a book, that's one discrete step you can take. Kind of chunking is the, I think, the process. I can put words in your mouth. If we can chunk this into a few pieces that are, for reasons that are explainable and understandable, here's why we advocate these few pieces, and because going for $30 million is a big lift. Going for 5 is a big lift, not as big a lift. And I think that's if this doesn't go on a switch, it goes on a dial. So if we can get it a little bit more, that'd be progress in any case. That would be closer on a percentage basis to keeping up with the needs of the system.
So let's call the question here. So what is it that you need us to do? I know that we have gotten a 1-month reprieve already from the city as far as submitting documents for the project. So what you're asking for us today is to approve submission of the documents that we have here. Is that correct?
That is correct. Procedurally, that is. So a motion from a vote from the board to submit this as part of the city's capital budget process.
This report that we received.
This report, and actually not the entirety of that report. So that'll be, the actual submission will be just the 20 pages
Of documents.
and I think a summary page on top of that as well, Chris.
There will be a memo, that'll be separate from that report, as well as canned documents from the city system, but then any other additional support documentation.
These same numbers, but the format based on the city process will be a different format, but the numbers will lie out precisely, but the actual submission process is defined by the town, not by us, but these numbers, yes.
Got it.
So are we comfortable? Does somebody want to make a motion to do that, or do you want to go ahead?
Let me ask you a question about that though. There's an attachment A in here, I think, Cindy, that you referenced that talks about projects from 2019. And I don't know if that's relevant to the report or the presentation that has to go. But my thinking on that was, it's 2 years old, there are things on it that are not still on our books. So if that is part of it, I would say that needs to be updated.
That was included as, so this was passed by the board in 2019. This was included in this report because in informed some of the selection of projects for inclusion, not because it will be included in the
Okay.
submission to city council. But that's why the dates are from 19, because that was the passage of this was from 19.
Okay, there's just one other nit in here, that if it's a part of the narrative that goes with it. There's a point in here where you talk about, if we spend this money, then we can get ourselves back to the top 5 parks in the country. And I don't remember where it is in here.
I think it's on that, I think it's in the.
Is it? Okay, and I don't know if that's part of it, but I just, the nit I had with that was that, yes, we want to be in the top 5, we want to be number 1. But as I recall, the report that came out that got us out of top 5 was not about our parks as they're presented, but our parks as to where they're located. And the fact that there were areas of our city that are typically underserved, where the distance to a park is more than a 10-minute walk. And that is the guideline.
One of the projects that we're looking at including in this submission has to do, I forget what it was called, but it was.
Equity, park equity or something like
Exactly,
that. Yeah.
and that from this list is something that we would use to take some of the property that, but I guess property I'm thinking of is what we keep talking about, is the 15 acres,
Yes,
that
yes.
is that midpoint right now.
Yes.
We own it,
Uh-huh.
we haven't taken responsibility for it yet, because we don't have the funding to bring it up to a park standard. But this project fund that we're requesting,
Yes.
some of those dollars would be used to put towards that property, and that's where that kind of comes
Yes.
from.
I think that's excellent. The way I read it was, if we fix the problems that we have, physical problems that we have, that's what's gonna get us back.
I see what you're saying, and I think one of the bigger contributors to that drop in rank was the 10-minute walk
Yes,
distance.
yes.
The parcel in question there, that McHenry parcel, is, by my recollection, this was illustrated by Matt DeBona, the GIS, it is in the middle of our, sort of, the more purple it is, the worse access is. In our most purple area, we happen to control this acreage. So it is contemplated that moving forward, and that is kind of that's a chunking candidate or a pullout candidate. I don't think you could call it an emergency in the same way that Waterworks did the line there, but it is an opportunity that way. And I think one thing I hear from the board is, I can paraphrase, what would you try if you knew you wouldn't fail? Just because we don't have the money here, let's not stop asking for it. They say you can hold an elephant with just a little rope around its ankle as it gets accustomed to it. Let's not be held by a little rope that way. Let's keep testing the rope sometimes.
Okay, I want to keep us moving here. So
Thank you.
what is our pleasure from a board standpoint? I'm comfortable with approving the submission of what has been developed by staff, but I
I'll
would,
move to accept the report or submitted, approve it as submitted.
is there a second? I'll second. Further discussion. The capital budget.
Just so long as we correct some things that are incorrect in this report, okay? Because it has been pointed out that things were mentioned by Burnett Woods.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that shouldn't be in here any longer because they're totally off the table.
Right.
And that's the camping and education thing.
Yeah, and that's where this report itself does not go.
That doesn't go to the city, right? That was just
Yeah.
for our information based from
Okay, just,
2019. That was- Gotcha.
but listed in one of those charts that is going to go to the city, I believe, are some things that shouldn't be there. Personally, I would take off Smale because I think that money is almost all there. And I, just as an example, I don't even know where it's listed at this point, but I didn't notice it.
I don't think included in the budget, capital budget request for this year is anything for Smith.
Well, on that 33 million bit, it's mentioned somewhere, but don't ask me where.
We do have some money that's set aside some improvements, or it's more maintenance items for the interactive water features.
I think
But it
what,
did
what you're
mention-
reading was there was a paragraph on Smale that talked about, especially lot
Finishing
28.
it up, finishing.
Finishing.
Right,
Yeah.
that's all part of attachment A, and that was the directive that the board approved back in December 2019. So if there are items on, like, there are a lot of things there that aren't up to date, and that's the reason why. I didn't want to take that document and edit it, because that's not what the board approved. So that attachment
Gotcha.
is exactly what was approved in December 2019. And I should have made it, or I should have clarified or done something on it, but that's why there was information on there that just isn't relevant.
Okay,
And,
good.
and
Okay.
that detail would not be part of the submission. to
Good,
the
okay.
board.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Cindy, thank you for this hours and hours of labor. Well done.
So we do have a question called, do we approve the submission of the capital budget numbers? And we've got a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion on that? Then all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you very much, Cindy.
Thank you.
And John, thank you for shepherding and preparing for your opportunity to sit in front of the legislative. Yep. Okay, let's move. These are more administrative things, so let's move these on contracts. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, contracts and agreements. There are a couple of items that are exceeding 12 months of length of time or are worth more than $50,000. And for the board requirements, we just need approval so that we can move forward. First one, we've got some emergency repairs we need to make to the bicentennial parking lot, $74,000. I think I've attached the pictures in the, so you can see the condition of it. It's going to be taken care of at the term contract, and hopefully we can get the work started for the asphalt plants open in March or early April.
May I add a brief note to that is relatively emergent from a safety area, it's also a revenue generating piece in that lot. And there is ongoing discussion with the board of visitors with funding the waterfront park. It is my understanding that dual pointing of this work does not preclude us from seeking reimbursement for that upon resolution of that issue with the DOE. So
Perfect. And I would advocate that we do ask for reimbursement. Okay.
Do you want me to jump early the note after?
Let's go ahead. We'll do it as one. Go ahead with the next one.
Rapid Road Sidewalk Replacement Project. We've done this project, and this will be the third phase. This is an accessibility project. We have a lot of asphalt walks throughout Rapid Run that we've been replacing. This has probably been going on for 10 years. This is the last piece of it. It'll improve accessibility up to the pavilion, to Glenway Avenue, and also to Ridley Road. So,
And just from sources of funds, so the bicentennial, we are initially going to take out of 318, which is set up for that park, and there's money available. The Rapid Run, that's coming out of capital money that has been,
Capital infrastructure.
okay.
Now, also, just so you know, we are also doing a replacement at Rapid Run. That work should begin next month. So this will be a really nice upgrade for that park. So,
It's
Okay,
such a great park.
it is.
Cindy, there are a lot of these asphalt walks throughout parks, and they mostly are in poor condition. Asphalt is when it's around a bunch of oak trees. Is that the plan with these asphalt walks, degrade to the point of accessibility that they'll be replaced with concrete?
yes, we don't do asphalt walks in parks anymore.
No. Okay. Do you have any plans for that at the pavilion at Burnett Woods? I'm surprised with all the attention on Burnett Woods that those walks haven't been.
Yeah, it's not on our radar, but we can certainly take a look at
And I might add, maybe this is Hops, still at Burnett Woods are all the signs for the hats off event. Mountain Road, that event was back to the wall. I would think they would be moving around in the parks and maybe the signs. Sure.
Okay.
Okay, and the last item, MSD approached us a couple of months ago. They need to do some work on the combined line that runs at the lower valley trail. So, because they need permission to access our property, we need to enter into an MOU, memorandum of understanding with them. We met out on site with them, with natural resources, understand what the scope is. So once we get the approval on this, they'll probably begin work in the next couple of weeks. There's the solar line that runs through there, some of the fittings are damaged and leaking. And that's what needs to be.
This one's scary to me. Just the collateral damage done to get in, repair. I understand that they are committing in the MOU to put it back together, but without them even being able to tell us today where the issue is and the extent to which it needs to be remediated is of concern to me, but I guess you tell us. I don't think we have an option here, right?
No.
Well, potentially to dictate the size of equipment, maybe to mitigate. They got some big, D9 going through there, tearing up stuff versus a little,
Backhoe.
mini
That's what
excavator or
I'm
something
worried
like
about.
that. But to your point, we promised not to hurt anything except that those 400-year-old trees that we screwed up, we'll make good on it somehow. So
I think there is an inherent alignment of interest in so much that they do have a restoration obligation now. How do you restore a 400-year-old tree? You don't, but I think they are motivated in some measure to not bring the biggest bulldozer they could find just because it was handy, that kind of thing, but that does not in any definitive way address the concern, but I think when it comes down to it, that's probably ties back to consent decree. So I don't think we have the juice.
But then from our standpoint, who is responsible from a parks standpoint of being on site and working with them to,
Supervisor.
who does that?
I'm gonna imagine that's both DNR and planning and design are
Well, we're
involved with
working
that.
with MSD. I mean, this isn't a new concept for us. We have to work with MSD or Waterworks. We met with them on site and to discuss the equipment.
Good.
Okay,
They'll put the tree protection up. We'll do what we ask them to do.
okay.
At this point, the stream is actually just dropping down into the line sewer system. So they gave it the stream in that valley, and because of the hole in the pipe, the entire stream is just going subsurface.
Okay,
So hopefully with this improvement, it'll actually improve the flow of the stormwater in that valley as well.
Which actually has a positive effect on the park as well, because you've got regulated flow of water.
Is this akin to what they did a few years ago in Rawson Woods?
Oh.
I mean, that was a massive.
that was a massive,
For
yeah.
months and months.
Yeah, I don't think, it sounds like all they need to do is make some repairs on some of the fittings, but until they really get into it, I think. Not quite sure, it's, something underground that works.
Any other questions on these? Is there a motion?
So moved.
There's a motion to approve the recommendations of these contracts. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Thomas. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Cindy, I'm sure is sad to be finished with this presentation today.
Hey, wasn't so bad.
Okay, next item up. Craig, are you going to present to us?
Good morning, commissioners. Today, I have a grant application for the Parks Foundation for the Liberty Gardens annual planning. So staff requests that we are permitted to apply and accept $5,490.50 for the planning.
Questions?
Great. Thanks to the Parks Foundation.
Do I have a motion, please?
Move to accept.
Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Castellini. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you to the foundation and to the citizens, residents of the St. James Plaza that raised all that money, St. James condominium. Thank you. We are to you, Mr. Director.
And I will endeavor to be relatively speedy. I just wanted to catch up on a few different things that didn't fit in other report pieces. I'm gonna, the primary issue is we had some pretty significant gaps in our staffing. We had, I want to say it was 23 or 24 approved positions that were open and not filled. The staff has done a commendable job of focusing on filling those positions in the past month. And we've had meaningful progress on a number of those. One of which actually requires board action or board approval. We have a position or a person who has accepted a provisional offer and to be the division manager of human resources. And I have as much detail as you might want, but I don't know how much detail you might want. The person is, we emphasize familiarity with governmental hiring. The person has familiarity with the city system, with NeoGov, with a broad range of things that are going to matter in municipal hiring. They are prepared to go in front of the civil service board on the 3rd of February, which could enable them to start as soon as the 6th, and they got your approval for that. So I can go deeper in that.
Anybody want any additional information?
Local hire.
Yes. Previous experience in citizens and the Hamilton County government.
Congratulations, and can,
Hallelujah.
just for civil service and everything, we need to approve this. So is there a motion to approve the hiring of a human resource division manager?
What has this board done in the past for division manager hiring? So we met with this person, I mean, reviewed resumes. I mean, I understand we're approving it, but we don't have any information other than we want to hire this person. But what's our role?
Typically, we have had few. The only other ones we recruited for the deputy director, which we were very involved with. We did the boy, I can't talk this morning, the CFO position, Craig's position. We did participate in that process of interviews and that sort of thing. This one, we have not. So
Who's been on the interview panel?
So Jenny, you got folks from Central HR to be part of that?
Yes, so the interview panel consisted of myself, Letitia Hazel from Central HR, and a district manager from Nick Cook. So we tried to get 3 wide range of perspectives on interviewing.
And candidly, my newness in this role, going forward, my intent would be to have a more of a write-up on that for board review when we're actually approving that. This was a miss on my part, but that was part of it. So going forward, I would anticipate having a fuller report than data in director's comments. That was not a requirement that I knew before.
No, it's good to have some
Relatively recently.
understanding of who's been involved. I recently worked with Letitia on the director of opening, and she is very good. So, I'm glad you got support from City Hall and Central HR and getting this position, and I know it's with great relief.
and to John's point, I think his intent is for us, so like for the planning department division manager, looking for more input from this board and from a more formal write-up on that.
But I wanted to call out the work of several members of the staff, particularly call out Jenny Mobley, but so the HR position is in the process of I should stop.
Yeah, stop. Can we have a motion to approve?
So good.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So officially, that is a position that the board has retained authority over appointing, so we have approved that for you.
Thank you very much. And I will have that cleaner on future spots that
Thank you.
fit that same profile. So that was a substantial, that has been meaningfully vacant for the better part of a year. So I'm thrilled to have that filled. The executive assistant final interviews should be tomorrow. That's Mary. Mary, not that Kelly and Amy haven't enjoyed stepping in, working with me enormously, but very excited to get that position finalized. A graphic designer position, Megan's position has been.
I'm sorry. what was the timing on the executive assistant?
Final interview should be this week.
Okay.
And tomorrow, it is scheduled, it should be, it's scheduled for tomorrow, I think 2 p.m. or something, so.
Internal candidates?
Uh,
City of Cincinnati?
that, actually, both of the executive assistant and the draft designer were both internal from the city, which I think says good things about parks standing within the committee, that, the city, rather, as folks are, drawn to the work we do and open to, working with this team. So, we are scheduling, we have the application process is closed for the division manager plan design, and we'll be scheduling interviews, hopefully next week, it could be the following week, but, looking forward to filling that position. We've also had, multiple offers go out for some labor openings. Did have some, not quite get the end zone on a couple of those, but, there's been an enormous effort. One of the things that was very evident in our last meeting is I think we had 23 open positions out of 184 in that range. And almost half of those, more than a third of those have been acted on in the past 4 or 5 weeks. So that was, I will tip my hat to Deputy Director Mobley, who has been an enormous lead on that. The CEV team, the entire CEV team has stepped in on a lot of those. So it is a collaborative effort. I'm excited to be advancing each of those. There's too much to do.
And I will just interject here. As John said, there are planning for interviews for the planning manager, whatever it's called. If anybody's interested in participating in any way, please talk with John about that. I know I personally am going to be out of town. So anybody that's interested in participating in any way, please contact John. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I just have 3 more things. One kind of comparatively minor, but in the last meeting, Sean Hassenstaub, who has been very involved with Miles Edward Parks, had reached out to the commissioners via correspondence to receive to have some disused and disrepair benches removed. Those were gone. I believe 4 days after the meeting, might have been 3 days after the meeting, so those are gone. We have a district-wide initiative going on the status of picnic table amenities. That's a longer process because of the procurement, et cetera, but we wanted to be responsive where we could and make sure you have some in storage that can be placed at the start of the season. So I communicated that to he was appreciative of understanding that you didn't just get to use benches. There's a bigger program, but we wanted to react more quickly to the concern you brought forward. So I think he appreciates.
Thank you for that reaction. Thank you.
The boat dock, they get substantially larger. The boat dock had the award was finalized on January 6th. The award recommendation was finalized on January 6th. There's a lot of process that goes through. There was a kickoff meeting earlier this week, I believe, for that, which represented law, planning, design, Hafner, who the award recommendation went to. What's somebody missing? Operations was there, Riverfront was there. So that is work in progress. And so that has kicked off. And two updates on pickleball. The resurfacing contract is sitting with procurement now. We had hoped to do the lighting that's a component of that project on a direct award contract. That was unfortunately denied. So we are reworking that. But that includes my
Question. Back to the park benches and things like that. Is it possible, or do we just go ahead and order 30 park benches, put them in inventory, and then pull from them so we don't have to go through this requisition process every time? Great.
Would you speak to that?
So yes, what we actually, with this budget this year, we put in a $40,000 earmark for picnic tables
Okay.
until we're able to make sure we're caught up, and we want to be able to rotate them on a 5-year basis.
Okay.
So what we're doing right now is analyzing not only how many picnic tables we need to either replace. We are taking out a lot of the old picnic tables that are embedded in the ground right now. A lot of them are crooked, they don't make sense
Yeah.
anymore. So we're in the process of removing those and then also dispersing the ones that we have throughout our system, plus using the allotted dollars that we had in this budget to purchase new and get a more standardized picnic table disbursement throughout the system. So that's what we're in the process right now.
Yeah, I just would hate to avoid that time cycle of getting permission or approval for a table at a time. If we just bulk buy, storm someplace and pull them out of inventory and hit the ground running, that's
Sure.
great.
So we are looking right now to purchase around 70 picnic tables. And we will analyze if we need to use all 70 for this spring, or certainly keep some in
Sure.
our.
I'm sure they'll get put to use
sure they
sooner
will as
rather than
well.
later.
I'm afraid to say I'll put them in inventory because I'm
Yeah,
afraid
I
we
doubt
would
you will.
use all 70 right away, but as the years continue, that is our goal, is to have some in inventory.
Anything we can do to expedite the approval process
Yeah.
and things like that, so we can just,
And so is the idea to standardize them across the system, so we have the same tables in every park?
Yes, that is the idea, to standardize them and also look at the size space that is utilized and have a standardization of kind of how many picnic tables should be in that space. Because I certainly know we go to some spaces and there's 10 sitting there, and then you go over here, that's a huge space and you have one. So we are,
Really good step towards equity.
I agree.
yes, we are certainly moving in that direction.
Yeah, great.
So,
Anything else for the director? I would just add,
God bless you.
yes, she said it. Thank you, both to you and the staff for the work that is being done and continues to be done. And the quantity and quality of what we've seen here, especially in this meeting. Thank you all. And thank you to your staff and your direction, John. Thank you.
It is the very example of a team effort. The challenges we face with parks are not internal. This group is fantastic. I'm proud to be part of it.
Great. We're going to move to open commissioner discussion comments. Anything that you would like to bring forward for the good of the cause? I would just ask on signage. That's been a key point that we've been talking about and had a significant budget approval last year. And just, I thought we were going to be piloting in December. Just wanted to see where we were on the status of getting signage out in our parks.
One of the reasons we're excited about the new hires replacement graphic designer position is because, Rocky, can you actually speak to it? It's a great fit for that question.
Sure. Yeah, with the turnover and then we've had internally, and then also with the off season, we tend to get a lot of sign requests for individual parks. So we've got a running list. Those are in varying stages of completion. In addition to that, Crystal's team has been working on, I think this might have been what you're referring to, all the trail signage has
Yes.
been redone,
Yeah.
as well as kiosks, welcome kiosks that would be standardized in each park.
Yes.
Her team has already inventoried the needs for the trails. And we've already worked up kind of a mock-up of what that kiosk would look like. The goal is going to be to have those fabricated and then installed by our staff in the later part of this winter, hopefully having them up for next season, March, April. That has been delayed a little bit on our end because we lost the graphic designer. She starts in a week or two, and that's going to be her first order of business, is to jump in and make sure all of those are working. I'm very happy to say that the accepted offer we have is from a graphic designer, who's the primary designer for the city's print shop. Ran their budget, understands signs for all the city departments, sizes, dimensions, styles, and also understands the procurement process to hopefully expedite having them fabricated. So we're
Great.
very excited to be.
I think thank you. And it's a very important issue. And that's why I bring it up, is because signage in our parks need to be upgraded. So thank you.
And I would only add to that, I'm sorry, I don't want to labor it, but like with the benches and the picnic tables, we're also seizing this opportunity to then standardize the process. We don't want to just
Perfect.
fix it one time at one park, but we want to figure out, here's the menu of signs that we have in our parks, and then we choose from the menu for what we need. That's great. Just because of legacy and all the
Yep.
years that have gone past, we have a whole bunch of different signs. It drives me nuts when I walk around the parks.
Yep.
We're going to begin to address that.
Great,
Have
thank
those been approved, or is there an intent to bring those standard signs to the board for approval?
Don't believe in the past that has happened. We typically just use the signs and replace them. But we could certainly, when we get our arms around that, bring that forward for you all to review or offer a presentation.
Well, I would like to at least see them. You know, I know that there was a big push in Burnett Woods for people to provide signage designs. And so it would be nice if the board saw that as well.
This is not unimportant. I mean, nothing's unimportant in my opinion. It's all very important. But you know, when you arrive at a national park and you see that sign, or in a national forest and you see that sign and you get that feeling like, we're here, you know, we're here, we're in this magical place. That is the power of a good sign. You know, that is the power of a good sign. And I have that certain feeling when I see those old, you know, wood signs that say Board of Park Commissioners or whatever. I mean, you feel like you're in a place that's part of the earth instead of fabricated, you know, whatever those other signs are made of that look like plastic signs. I mean, these are just my personal opinions. I understand we have to consider maintenance of these signs, but I do like the idea of a very standardized sign and the importance of that feeling to get and that brand experience that we have versus Snow Park when we see these signs. It's very important.
Other
Thanks for bringing that up, Jim.
yeah, other input, like questions? Go.
Couple of questions. One is the day of service in the 4 parks. And Rocky, I sent you a note about this. I'm assuming those did not happen because of the weather.
They did happen.
They did?
Yeah, we actually had, we initially had 9. It's always a big day for us. For those who don't know, Martin Luther King Day is National Day of Service, even though it's in the middle of winter. We started out, as we have typically done, with a total of 9 events. Unfortunately, primarily due to COVID, we scaled those back and had to cancel a number of events because we just weren't getting the signups. Like, for example, UC is a big source for our volunteers, and they were remote, and we just weren't getting volunteers.
Yeah.
However, there were 4 projects that went forward because we had people that were willing to do it, and we had needs, and it was a snowstorm the night before. I was fully anticipating receiving cancellation notices on those, but I think it speaks both to the commitment of our staff. On my team, Crystal, our volunteer coordinator, our staff has to go then man and woman these events, as well as our volunteers that they still went forward and had them. So as I would typically do, we'll give a summary of what occurred and where, and I'd be happy to share that with you all, but very proud of the efforts there.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it because I saw the snow and I was like, oh, bummer. We're not gonna get the volunteers to come out. That's fantastic.
Yeah, 2 years ago, it was just bitterly cold. It might have been 3 now. My sense of time is gone. We had to cancel everything.
Yeah.
It's like 7 degrees.
Right.
There were events in Avondale, there were events at Fairview Park and California Woods, and I'm forgetting the 4th. I forget what the 4th was, but there were.
There was, there was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
MLK for sure. Yeah, that's terrific. Glad to hear that. The other question I had is, I think it was last meeting or the meeting before, we talked about creating a system that made it easy for people who come to the park and notice things or feedback they want to get to us, making it easy for them to do that. I know staff was going to go off and come back with some proposal, suggestion, something you'd already been working on. Just wanted to put that on the radar and
I do recall that, and after that meeting, we submitted a memo to the board that followed up on that and described what's currently in place as well as what's been in planning. So I'd be happy to.
I missed
send
that.
background.
I appreciate it. If you
Totally
said it.
understand.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other input, comments, questions?
What's our go live date for our new website, Rocky?
We haven't picked the exact date yet, but it's going to be likely the 3rd week of February.
Looking forward to that.
We're excited and anxious.
Sure.
Yes, sir. I have a sequence to say, just speaking to speed and responsiveness, our friends at the Parks Foundation have messaged me in the course of the meeting and said that the half off luncheon signs will be removed today. So I can leave your list, and thank you to our friends at the foundation.
Great.
Actually, I'm sorry, there's one comment on the website. I know we sent around that update, but we're at the point now where we're building out the beta site. Because of city security restrictions, we can't like send a link for you all to look at it. But if any of you are interested to come up and schedule a time with us, we've got an office down here on the network. You could come up, sit with us, look at the site. We're kind of taking this moment as a pause and an opportunity to receive feedback from you, as well as some other stakeholder groups. We're not putting out the whole world saying what should our website look like. There's some key stakeholder groups that we work with and users. So if any of you are interested in that, just follow up with me after the meeting. We can get that set up.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, before we go into executive session, part of what we were going to discuss really is public information. So this is in relation to a search committee for looking for and recruiting a new director. And we will establish a search committee. And we have been told by the city solicitor that any committee that we form as a park board is a public entity, so to speak, and is required to go through public meeting rules and regulations, just meaning that it's posted and available. If there is confidential information or that sort of thing that would be reviewed by that committee does have the opportunity to go into executive session as well, so that discussion of individuals and confidential information is maintained outside of the public view. So knowing that that's the game rules that we'll play by, and knowing that I would like to be able to be all inclusive with all the commissioners. So I would like to set up a search committee that includes all the commissioners, plus, because of our unique relationship with the Parks Foundation, I've asked that the president and vice president of the Parks Foundation, Dan Vogelpohl and Brian Tiffany, become appointed members. There was concern that one person could not perhaps be able to attend as many meetings, et cetera. So we'll include those two. Again, it's a public meeting. It's easier. We could do this just as a board, but I think this will allow us to not be bound by quorum rules and all of those things established by the park board itself. So it's, I think, more appropriate to have it as a separate committee with their own rules and quorum regulations, et cetera. The only authority that will be given to this search committee will be to review and manage the process of identifying a director candidate. This park board, and only the park board, the 5 commissioners, are the only ones that can vote and approve any hiring of any individual. So the work of this committee will be to review that question and bring a recommendation to this board for final action. I am going to be out of town a lot, and I am thrilled to say that Molly has agreed to chair this search committee. So we will, Molly, thankful has accepted that. And so those are the ground rules that we will work under. So I think as this board, I would like to get approval to establish that search committee. And then it's an approved committee of this board. We will go into executive session next to talk about specifics and some individual and some more confidential information. But as a public, I think it's appropriate that we approve and establish the committee and the ground rules for that committee in public.
Jim, I'm also happy to give the commissions an update on where things stand right now, which is public information, of course. Jim and I met on a telephone call with Ed Ramsey, who heads up the HR group, and also Kelly Carr and Letitia. What's Letitia's last name? Hazel. And talked through the process for getting the position posted. I've made some edits to the job description, essentially, which open it to candidates that don't necessarily have a direct perks background.
Mhm.
So we'd like to cast the net as wide as possible to get executive level individuals that have got maybe even experience navigating the governmental sector, have experience, getting big things accomplished as it relates to funding through a governmental entity, but also who have the wherewithal to manage a large number of stakeholder relationships, which this role very much does. We discussed getting an executive recruiter for this role, which we may do, but first we're going to get this position posted, see what kind of candidates surface from this initial round. And we ask any of those that are engaged in watching, and of course, anyone that's in the room, to think about individuals that would be great for this position and invite them to apply. Rocky has got the modified job description and intends to get that. We intend to work with Letitia, who's been made point for our contact for this. We intend to get this posted on or about February 1st. So this will get posted on the normal places like LinkedIn and governmentjobs.com and the NPRA Association, or I guess the A is the association. And again, we hope that we have a lot of strong responses for candidates on this. If we get to the middle to the end of February and aren't satisfied with the reception we're getting, we'll be looking to maybe engage an external recruiter for the role. That's where things stand right now. I look forward to getting this selection committee together that will include Dan and Brian. We'll look at the calendar and I'll kind of put out some milestones there. We may be able to tag those onto existing park commission meetings and invite them to attend either at the front of that meeting or at the end of that meeting, so that we're not bringing everyone together too much more frequently than we already are together. So that is
Great.
I think I covered it. That's the status on where things are right now. John, we hope not to have you in here longer than you can stand it. So.
Okay, so as I mentioned, there are some additional discussions from a confidential standpoint. So I would move that under revised code section 121.22. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Did you have a motion you were going to about?
Oh, I'm so,
approving your-
thank you. Thank you. So I would like to have a motion to approve the search committee as I laid it out.
So moved.
Did you say so moved?
I did.
Linda did.
Yeah, I'll second.
Second, all those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. Okay, with that, then we'll go into executive session. I move under the Ohio Revised Code, section 121.22, paragraph G, to go into executive session to discuss the appointment, employment, and compensation of a public employee or official. That's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, and we need a roll call vote for this one. So Kelly, would you call the roll?
Commencing the roll call vote. President Getz?
Yes.
Vice President Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Castellini?
Yes.
Commissioner Linder?
Yes.
Commissioner North?
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passes.
So if John obviously is going to say, but if you guys could all leave, and Kelly, Kevin Frank obviously can stay on. Anyone else we would ask, other than Kevin, to